Umatilla County, Oregon Territory, April 1889. While every homesteader in the Columbia Basin was building kitchens with chimneys that sent cooking heat straight into the sky, Jin Yoon was doing something that made his neighbors ride over just to ask why his cabin had a chimney at the wrong end. The Korean rice farmer wasn't venting his cooking stove through the kitchen roof. He was running the exhaust horizontally beneath 4 separate rooms before it exited 45 feet away. The man built his chimney backwards. Smoke's supposed to go up, not sideways. Nobody understood what Jin knew about captured cooking heat and sequential floor warming that would bring every room in his cabin to 70 degrees while his wife simply made breakfast. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Jin Yoon had spent 27 years living above heated floors before he ever set foot on Oregon soil. The village of Ondol in Gyeongsang Province was a place where Ondol, the underfloor heating system, was not a luxury but the foundation of every home, where families had cooked and heated with the same fire for longer than anyone could remember, where the idea of burning one fire to cook and a separate fire to heat would have seemed not just wasteful, but absurd. His grandmother had kept the kitchen fire that warmed his childhood home. The budumak, the traditional cooking hearth, sat at one end of the house, its exhaust channeled horizontally beneath the stone and clay floor, traveling the full length of the dwelling before exiting through a chimney at the far end. Every morning she rose before dawn to prepare rice, and by the time the family gathered to eat, every room in the house was warm. The cooking fire accomplished both purposes simultaneously. "Fire is precious," his grandmother had explained, stirring the morning pot while young Jin sat on the warm floor beside the hearth. "Wood is labor. Time is life. The foolish man burns 3 fires where one will serve. The wise man captures what the foolish man wastes. Your breakfast heats your floor. Your dinner heats your bed. The fire knows no difference between cooking and warming. Only the channel knows where the heat must go." The lesson stayed with Jin through his 20s, through the upheaval that drove Korean families across the Pacific in the 1880s, through 2 years of railroad labor in California, where he saved enough money to file a homestead claim in Oregon Territory. When he finally stood on his own land in Umatilla County in the spring of 1889, the first thing he noticed was how Americans built their kitchens. Every cabin had a cooking stove with a chimney rising straight up through the roof. Every cabin had a separate heating stove in the main room with its own chimney. Many cabins had a fireplace in the bedroom as well. 3 fires, 3 chimneys, 3 separate fuel supplies, and the cooking stove, which burned every single day regardless of weather, sent 100% of its heat straight into the sky the moment it left the pot. Jin walked through the neighboring homesteads, observing how the settlers lived. He watched women cook breakfast while their husbands fed the heating stove in the next room. And he watched families burn wood in the kitchen, and burn more wood in the parlor, and burn still more wood in the bedroom. He watched heat rise uselessly from kitchen chimneys, while separate fires struggled to warm separate spaces. "They burned 3 fires," he told Sue on the 3rd evening, sketching on brown paper by lantern light while their family crowded into the temporary tent that served as shelter. "The cooking fire heats nothing but the pot. The parlor fire heats nothing but the parlor. The bedroom fire heats nothing but the bedroom. In Ondol, grandmother heated our entire home with the fire she used to cook our rice. The heat traveled beneath our floors from kitchen to bedroom. 1 fire, every room warm." Sue studied the sketch taking shape. Not separate rooms with separate stoves. But a long cabin with the kitchen at one end and the chimney at the other. The cooking exhaust traveling horizontally beneath every floor in between. "The children's room will be farthest from the kitchen. Will it be cold?" "It will be coolest. Not cold. The dining room nearest the kitchen will be warmest. The bedroom will be moderate. The children's room will be gentle. This is how it should be. Warm spaces for gathering, cool spaces for sleeping. The gradient is not a flaw. The gradient is the design." The argument with Sue never happened. She had grown up in the same Korean village, cooked over the same buttermac hearth, understood the same physics of captured cooking heat that Jin understood. "Show me where the kitchen will stand," she said, walking the building site with him in late April as the spring rains softened the Oregon clay. Jin paced out the footprint, 45 feet long running east to west, 16 feet wide running north to south. He pointed to the eastern end. "The kitchen here, where you will cook." The cooking stove vents not upward but downward into a channel that runs beneath the floor. The channel travels west, first beneath the dining room, then beneath our bedroom, then beneath the children's room. The chimney stands at the western end, 45 feet from the stove. Every room between receives heat from your cooking fire. And when I am not cooking, the floors grow cold. You cook 3 times each day: morning rice, midday meal, evening dinner. Each cooking session heats the floor for 4 to 6 hours after the fire dies. The stone beneath holds the warmth and releases it slowly. By the time one meal's heat fades, the next meal's fire has begun. The floor never truly cools because you never truly stop cooking. Word reached the neighboring homesteads within weeks. Clarence Whitmore, the American farmer who owned property to the north, rode over on a Saturday morning to see if the rumors were true. He found Jin laying foundation stones for a long, narrow cabin with no chimney stack above the kitchen area. "Yoon," Whitmore called from his horse. Folks in town are saying you're building your cabin backwards. Kitchen at one end, chimney at the other. Smoke's supposed to go straight up, not travel 45 feet sideways. That can't be what you're actually doing." Jin straightened from his work and wiped clay from his hands. "That is exactly what I am doing. The cooking exhaust travels horizontally beneath every room before exiting. My wife cooks breakfast. The heat from her cooking fire warms every floor in the cabin. One fire does 2 jobs, cooking and heating. Your wife cooks breakfast and sends the heat into the sky while your heating stove burns separate wood to warm separate rooms. A cooking fire heating a whole cabin." Whitmore shook his head slowly. "Man, cooking fires don't burn hot enough or long enough to heat a house. That's why we have heating stoves, big fireboxes that burn all day. Your wife's little cooking fire won't heat 4 rooms. You'll freeze waiting for breakfast. A cooking stove produces 25,000 to 40,000 BTUs per hour during active use, the same as your heating stove. The difference is where the heat goes. Your heat goes up the chimney. My heat goes under the floor. Same fire, same energy, different result. And when the channel clogs with soot, when smoke backs up into your kitchen, running exhaust sideways is fighting gravity. Smoke wants to rise. You're building a system that fights nature. The chimney at the far end still rises. The draft still pulls. The horizontal channel simply delays the exit, capturing heat along the way. Koreans have built this way for 2,000 years. The smoke does not fight us. The smoke serves us." Whitmore turned his horse. "Your cabin, your funeral. But when your wife's cooking smoke fills your bedroom instead of going up the chimney, don't say nobody warned you about building flues that run sideways instead of up." Sue watched him ride away, then looked at her husband standing among the foundation stones that would shape a home Americans had never imagined. "He thinks cooking heat is waste heat. He doesn't understand that waste is simply energy waiting to be captured." What Jin Yoon understood from 27 years of Korean Ondol living, modern thermal engineers would later quantify with precision. But the principles he was applying beneath his Oregon cabin had been tested through 2,000 years of construction in every region of Korea, where winters demanded heat and fuel demanded respect. The fundamental insight was this: cooking is heating that happens to produce food. The heat itself is identical to heating stove heat, and wasting it is a choice, not a necessity. A cooking stove during active use produced between 25,000 and 40,000 BTUs per hour. This was comparable to, often exceeding, the output of a dedicated heating stove. The difference lay entirely in what happened to that energy after it left the firebox. In conventional American construction, 100% of cooking exhaust heat rose through the kitchen chimney and vanished into the atmosphere. The cooking was complete. The heating was wasted. A 45-foot horizontal flue beneath 4 rooms transformed this equation. Hot exhaust gases leaving the cooking stove entered a stone-lined channel, running the full length of the cabin. As the gases traveled, they surrendered heat to the surrounding stone and earth. By the time exhaust reached the chimney at the far end, it had lost 85 to 90% of its thermal energy to the floor system. The remaining 10 to 15%, cooler gases still warm enough to rise, exited through the chimney, maintaining the draft that pulled the entire system. The sequential heating created a natural temperature gradient that was not a flaw, but a feature. The dining room, or nearest the kitchen, received the hottest exhaust and achieved the warmest floor, perhaps 75 degrees during active cooking. The bedroom in the middle received moderately cooled exhaust and achieved a moderate floor, perhaps 68 degrees. The children's room farthest from the kitchen received the gentlest warmth, perhaps 62 degrees. This gradient aligned perfectly with human comfort needs. Gathering spaces where families sat and ate benefited from warmth. Sleeping spaces where bodies generated their own heat under blankets benefited from cooler temperatures. Medical research would later confirm what Korean builders had known for millennia. Sleep quality improves in cooler rooms, while waking comfort requires warmer spaces. The Ondol gradient provided both. So the thermal mass of the floor system extended heating far beyond active cooking. Stone and packed earth beneath the floor absorbed heat during the cooking session and released it slowly over 4 to 6 hours. A morning cooking session that ended at 7 continued warming floors until noon or beyond. An evening cooking session that ended at 7 continued warming floors through the night. With 3 daily cooking sessions, breakfast, lunch, dinner, the floor received near-continuous thermal input. The fuel mathematics were stark. An American homestead with separate cooking stove, heating stove, and bedroom fireplace might burn 8 to 12 cords of wood per winter. Jin's single cooking fire, used for purposes the family required anyway, would provide the majority of heating needs. Supplemental heating during extreme cold or extended cloudy periods might require 1 to 2 additional cords. Total winter consumption, 3 to 4 cords instead of 10. Korean Ondol systems had traditionally used the buttermac cooking hearth as the primary heat source. Dedicated heating fires were rare. Cooking occurred 2 to 3 times daily, and the thermal mass held warmth between sessions. The system was not merely efficient, but elegant. The fire that fed the family also sheltered the family. Jin's neighbors would build separate cooking stoves and separate heating stoves, each with its own chimney, each consuming its own fuel, each wasting what the other could use. Jin would build a kitchen that was also a furnace, a cooking fire that was also a heating system, a single flame that accomplished everything his neighbor's 3 flames struggled to achieve. Construction began the 2nd week of May, with spring warmth drying the Oregon clay, and Jin determined to complete the structure before autumn brought the first cold nights. He started with the channel system, working from chimney end backward toward the kitchen. The trench ran 45 feet long, 18 inches wide, 14 inches deep, the backbone of the entire heating system. Jin dug carefully, maintaining a slight upward slope from kitchen to chimney that would ensure proper draft while maximizing heat transfer to the floor above. The channel lining demanded his finest work. Jin had located a deposit of flat basalt stones 6 miles east, dense, dark rock that would absorb heat efficiently and radiate it steadily. He hauled wagon load after wagon load, selecting stones for their flat faces and dark color. The channel floor received a layer of packed clay, then a course of fitted stones. The walls rose 14 inches, each stone mortared with a mixture of clay and lime. The capstones, heavy flat slabs that would support the floor above, completed the sealed passage. The serpentine pattern within each room required careful planning. The main channel entered each room's section, then split into a winding path that covered maximum floor area before rejoining and continuing to the next room. In the dining room nearest the kitchen, the channel wound back and forth 3 times across the 12-foot width. In the bedroom, the pattern repeated. In the children's room, a final serpentine path extracted the last useful heat before the exhaust rose to the chimney. The floor construction layered above the channels. Jin spread 2 inches of packed sand over the capstones, providing an insulating bed that would distribute heat evenly. Above the sand, flat stones formed the actual floor surface, dark basalt matching the channel lining, selected for its ability to absorb and radiate warmth. The stones fit tightly together, mortared with thin clay joints that would expand and contract with temperature changes without cracking. The cabin walls rose around the floor system through June and July. Jin built with logs cut from the Blue Mountains to the south, notched at the corners in the traditional American style, but arranged to accommodate his Korean heating system. The kitchen at the eastern end received a reinforced floor section around the cooking stove, with a dedicated firebox that vented downward into the channel rather than upward through a chimney. The cooking stove itself was Sue's domain. She specified the dimensions, large enough for the cast iron pots that would feed 5 people, positioned at a height comfortable for her smaller frame, with a firebox opening that allowed easy feeding without stooping. The critical feature was the exhaust outlet. Instead of rising through a stovepipe and chimney, the exhaust dropped through an opening in the reinforced floor, entering the horizontal channel that would carry its heat the length of the cabin. The chimney at the western end rose 12 feet above the roofline, its draft strong enough to pull exhaust through 45 feet of horizontal channel. Jin built it from the same basalt used in the channel, mortared tightly, capped with a stone cover that would shed rain while allowing smoke to escape. By late September, the cabin stood complete. From the outside, it appeared unusual only in the placement of its single chimney, at the far end rather than above the kitchen. Inside, the floor showed no sign of the channel system beneath, only smooth, dark stone that would soon carry warmth from one end of the home to the other. Jin kindled a test fire in the cooking stove on the first day of October, Sue standing beside him as smoke disappeared into the floor opening and emerged minutes later from the distant chimney. "The channel draws," Jin said, pressing his palm to the dining room floor. "By morning, when you cook breakfast, every room will know." By mid-October, the Yoon cabin had become the most discussed construction in Umatilla County. The autumn curiosity had shifted into something closer to genuine concern, as neighbors realized the Korean family was actually planning to spend winter in a cabin heated entirely by cooking fires traveling sideways beneath the floor. "It's some kind of foreign arrangement," one farmer's wife declared at the general store in Pendleton. No proper heating stove in the parlor, no fireplace in the bedroom. Just a cooking stove at one end and a chimney at the other. The woman's supposed to heat the whole house by making breakfast. Someone ought to tell her that's not how stoves work. The practical objections multiplied as the first frosts arrived. Clarence Whitmore rode over in early November with new concerns, or his breath clouding in the cold morning air. "Yoon," Whitmore called from outside the cabin, "I've been thinking about your arrangement. What happens when your wife isn't cooking? Middle of the night, fire's been out for hours. Your floors turn to ice. A heating stove burns all night. A cooking fire burns 3 times a day. You'll freeze between meals." Jin emerged from the cabin door, the interior noticeably warm behind him, despite no visible stove glowing in the main room. "Come inside. Feel the floor. My wife cooked dinner 3 hours ago. The fire has been out since 7. Whitmore dismounted reluctantly and stepped through the door. He stopped 2 steps inside, looking down at the dark stone floor with visible confusion. "It's warm. The floor is warm." He knelt and pressed his palm flat against the stone. "How is the floor warm? There's no fire burning? The stone holds what the fire gave. 3 hours of cooking, 6 hours of warmth. By the time the floor begins to cool, my wife prepares breakfast. The morning fire reheats what the evening fire warmed. The cycle continues. The floor never truly cools because cooking never truly stops." But the far end, the children's room, that's 45 feet from the kitchen. The heat can't travel that far and still warm anything. Jin led him through the cabin, room by room. The dining room floor held perhaps 70 degrees, warm enough for bare feet. The bedroom floor held perhaps 65 degrees, comfortable for sleeping. The children's room floor held perhaps 60 degrees, cool but not cold, gentle warmth rising from below. The gradient is the design, Jin explained. Warm where we gather, cool where we sleep. The children sleep better in gentle warmth than in hot rooms. The heat knows where to go because the channel takes it there. Sven Karlsson, the Swedish farmer from 3 miles west, visited in late October. Unlike Whitmore, Karlsson understood something about thermal mass. Swedish farms used massive masonry stoves that held heat for hours. His concern was different. "The mass I understand," Karlsson said, kneeling to feel the warm dining room floor. "Stone holds heat. This is known. But the draft, 45 feet of horizontal travel before the chimney. How does the smoke not back up into the kitchen? How does the system pull? The chimney rises 12 feet above the roof line. The draft is strong. The channel slopes gently upward from kitchen to chimney, 2 inches over 45 feet. Warm gases rise. The slope guides them. The chimney pulls them. The system breathes because the design allows it to breathe." Karlsson stood slowly, his expression thoughtful. "In Sweden, we build masonry stoves with channels inside the stove body. Serpentine paths that extract heat before exhaust exits. You have built the same principle but stretched it across an entire house. The principle is the same. Only the scale is different. One fire. One channel. Every room warmed by the fire that cooks your food." January 1890 arrived with brutality that old-timers in Umatilla County would reference for decades. An Arctic system descended from British Columbia on January 6th, driving temperatures from a manageable 18 degrees to 29 below zero by midnight. Dawn on January 7th brought 32 below. By the morning of January 10th, the thermometer outside the land office in Pendleton read 36 degrees below zero. The Columbia Basin, normally moderated by Pacific air, had become a frozen wasteland. Conventional homesteads became survival chambers of desperate labor. Clarence Whitmore's cabin consumed wood at a terrifying rate. His heating stove in the parlor burned constantly, over 120 pounds per day. His cooking stove in the kitchen burned another 40 pounds. His bedroom fireplace, which he had thought unnecessary, now burned 60 pounds more just to keep sleeping quarters above freezing. 3 fires, 3 chimneys, 220 pounds of wood per day, and still the floors stayed cold as ice, heat rising uselessly to the ceiling while his family's feet froze. Sven Karlsson's cabin fared somewhat better. His Swedish masonry stove held heat longer than Whitmore's cast iron. But the kitchen remained separate, its cooking heat vanishing up its own chimney while the main stove struggled to warm the rest. He burned 140 pounds per day and maintained comfort only in the main room. The bedrooms stayed frigid. Throughout the county, families sealed themselves into cabins and burned everything they could find. Woodpiles that had seemed adequate in November shrank to nothing by mid-January. One homesteader burned his barn siding. Another burned fence posts. A widow 3 miles south was found frozen in her bed, her heating stove cold, her woodpile exhausted. Nobody rode to check on the Yoon family during those desperate days. The roads were impassable, the cold too dangerous, and besides, everyone assumed the Korean family with their backwards chimney and their cooking fire heating system had either frozen solid or huddled around their kitchen stove in defeat. On the morning of January 10th, the coldest day of the cold snap, 11-year-old Hana Yoon walked barefoot from the children's room to the kitchen to help her mother prepare breakfast. The dining room floor held 68 degrees. The bedroom floor held 63 degrees. The children's room floor held 59 degrees. The kitchen, where Sue was already stoking the morning fire, warmed rapidly toward 75. The cooking fire had been out since the previous evening's dinner, over 12 hours without flame. yet every floor in the cabin remained warm enough for bare feet. The thermal mass of 45 feet of stone channel and stone flooring had absorbed so much heat over months of daily cooking that even extended overnight periods could not drain it completely. By the time breakfast was ready, the floors had recharged. The dining room touched 72 degrees. The bedroom reached 66 degrees. The children's room climbed to 62 degrees. The family sat down to eat on a floor that radiated warmth upward, while temperatures outside remained 36 below zero. Jin pressed his palm to the dining room floor after breakfast, I feeling the gentle heat that would persist until lunch. "How much wood did we burn today?" he asked Sue. "The same as always, 20 pounds for breakfast. We will burn 20 more for lunch, 20 more for dinner. 60 pounds total." 60 pounds per day. Whitmore was burning 220. The difference, 160 pounds daily, represented hours of labor, cords of wood, and the line between survival and exhaustion. "Your grandmother knew," Sue said quietly, watching the children play on the warm floor. "One fire serves many purposes. We cook because we must cook. The floor warms because we built the channel to capture what others throw away." Jin Yoon had kept careful records from the first day Sue lit the cooking stove. 27 years of Korean Ondol living had taught him that floors revealed their secrets through observation. Temperature patterns, heat duration, fuel consumption. The Oregon cabin was no different. During the January cold snap, he made his most important observations yet. The cooking stove consumed approximately 20 pounds of wood per meal. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. 60 pounds per day. Total. This was not additional fuel burned for heating. This was fuel burned for cooking, which the family required regardless of temperature. The heating came free, a byproduct of meals that would have been prepared in any case. Jin measured floor temperatures at 4 points throughout each day. After breakfast, cooking ended at 7 in the morning. Dining room 72 degrees, bedroom 66 degrees, children's room 62 degrees, kitchen cooling from 78. By noon, before lunch, dining room 65 degrees, bedroom 61 degrees, children's room 58 degrees. After lunch cooking, temperatures rose 5 to 8 degrees throughout. After dinner cooking, temperatures peaked for the day. By midnight, dining room 64 degrees, bedroom 60 degrees, children's room 56 degrees. The thermal mass held heat far longer than he had predicted. Even during the coldest night, with exterior temperatures at 36 below and no fire burning for 12 hours, the floor temperatures never dropped below 54 degrees in any room. The stone channel system had accumulated so much heat over months of daily cooking that the mass itself had warmed to a stable baseline, releasing heat slowly throughout the night. Wood consumption told the most dramatic story. The Yoon family burned 60 pounds per day, all for cooking, none specifically for heating. Clarence Whitmore burned 220 pounds per day across 3 separate fires and maintained lower comfort levels. Sven Carlson burned 140 pounds per day and still suffered cold bedrooms. Jin calculated the seasonal difference. At 60 pounds per day for 120 days of true winter, the Yoon household would consume approximately 3,600 pounds of wood, roughly 2 cords. At 220 pounds per day, Whitmore would consume over 13,000 pounds, roughly 7 cords. The difference of 5 cords represented weeks of cutting, splitting, hauling, and stacking labor that the Yoon family simply did not perform. The temperature gradient confirmed what Korean builders had known for millennia. The warmest floor, the dining room, served as the gathering space where the family sat, ate, and socialized. Bodies at rest benefited from warmth. The moderate bedroom provided comfortable sleeping without the overheating that disrupted rest. The coolest children's room offered gentle warmth that promoted deep sleep for young bodies that generated substantial heat under blankets. American cabins inverted this logic. Heating stoves in main rooms created hot ceilings and cold floors. Bedrooms received minimal heat and stayed frigid. The children's rooms were often coldest, forcing families to pile blankets and sleep in discomfort. The heat went where it was least needed, ceiling height, while floors where people actually lived remained cold. Jin documented the cooking patterns carefully. Breakfast, 45 minutes of active fire, 2 hours of residual cooking, 4 to 6 hours of floor heating. Lunch, 30 minutes of active fire, 1 hour of residual cooking, 3 to 4 hours of floor heating. Dinner, 60 minutes of active fire, 2 hours of residual cooking, 8 to 10 hours of overnight floor heating. The sessions overlapped in effect, each meal's residual warmth persisting until the next meal's fire began. 3 meals, Jin told Sue, closing his notebook. 3 cooking fires. 24 hours of warm floors. We have not changed how much we cook. We have only changed where the heat goes. Grandmother would say we have changed nothing. We have simply remembered what others forgot. The morning after the cold snap broke, Clarence Whitmore arrived at the Yoon homestead before sunrise. He had not slept properly in weeks, not from cold alone, though his cabin had been brutal, but from the exhaustion of feeding 3 separate fires around the clock and the growing desperation of watching his woodpile vanish. His wife was hollow-eyed from midnight feedings. His children had forgotten what warm floors felt like. His understanding of how a home should work had been shattered by a Korean rice farmer whose wife cooked breakfast and heated the entire house. "Show me," Whitmore said when Jin met him at the door. "Show me everything. The channel, the cooking stove, how the heat travels. I need to understand." Jin led him first to the kitchen, where Sue was already preparing the morning rice. The cooking stove glowed with steady flame, but no chimney rose above it. Instead, the exhaust disappeared through an opening in the reinforced floor, entering the channel system that ran the length of the cabin. "The fire burns here," Jin explained, gesturing at the firebox. "The exhaust drops into the channel beneath. The channel carries the heat 45 feet to the chimney at the far end. Every room between receives warmth from the gases passing below." Whitmore knelt and pressed his palm to the kitchen floor near the stove. "It's hot. Not warm. Hot. Maybe 80 degrees. The kitchen receives the most direct heat. The dining room next will reach 72 by the time breakfast is ready. The bedroom will reach 66. The children's room will reach 62. Each room receives what the fire surrenders as it travels." They walked the length of the cabin, Whitmore pressing his palm to the floor in each room. The dining room radiated steady warmth. The bedroom felt comfortable and moderate. The children's room offered gentle heat, not hot, but unmistakably warm. At the far end, Jin opened a small access panel at the base of the chimney. "Feel the exhaust here," Jin said. Whitmore held his hand near the opening. "It's barely warm. Maybe 90 degrees. It entered the channel at 400 degrees. 45 feet later, it exits at 90. 310 degrees of heat surrendered to the floor. That heat is now in the stone beneath your feet. That heat will stay there for hours after the fire dies." Sven Carlson arrived an hour later, having seen Whitmore's horse tied outside. He found both men sitting at the dining room table, eating breakfast on a floor that radiated warmth upward while Sue cleaned the kitchen behind them. "The system works," Carlson said simply, kneeling to press his palm against the warm stone. "I doubted the draft. I was wrong." "The draft requires proper design," Jin replied. "The channel slopes gently upward. The chimney rises high. The physics allows the smoke to travel because the geometry guides it correctly. Koreans have built this way for 2,000 years. The smoke knows where to go." Whitmore set down his cup. "I cannot rebuild my cabin. The foundation is set. The chimneys are built. But my son plans to homestead next spring. His cabin could be built this way from the start. Any cabin can capture cooking heat. The channel must run the full length. The floor must be stone to hold the warmth. The kitchen must stand at one end and the chimney at the other. The design is simple. The execution requires care. We will show your son how to build what we built." Whitmore extended his hand. "My wife cooks 3 meals a day and sends all that heat into the sky. Your wife cooks 3 meals a day and heats every room in the house. That's not foreign foolishness. That's wisdom I should have learned years ago." Jin Yoon helped build 3 more cooking fire heating systems before the following winter. Whitmore's son constructed the first, a 30-foot cabin with the kitchen at one end and the chimney at the other, the exhaust traveling beneath 3 rooms before exiting. Carlson built a modified version on his own property, adding a secondary channel that branched to warm a small workshop beside the main cabin. A German homesteader named Richter rode 40 miles after hearing rumors at the Pendleton Land Office, spent 3 days studying the Yoon cabin, and returned to build a similar system with a larger cooking stove that served both his family and a small bakery business. By the autumn of 1892, 7 cooking fire heating systems operated across Umatilla County and the surrounding territory. Each followed Jin's core principles: cooking stove at one end, chimney at the other, horizontal channel beneath every room between. Some families built compact 3-room arrangements. Others extended to 4 or 5 rooms. The Richter family eventually added a second channel line that heated a small greenhouse attached to their cabin, growing vegetables through winter using nothing but the exhaust from their daily cooking. The fuel savings proved consistent across every installation. Families that had burned 8 to 12 cords of firewood each winter now burned 2 to 4, their cooking fires providing the majority of heating needs while eliminating the separate stoves and fireplaces that had consumed the rest. The labor savings compounded. Wood not cut was time not spent, energy not exhausted, and backs not broken by endless winter labor, but the deeper benefit was simplicity. Separate heating systems had required constant attention, fires to feed, dampers to adjust, multiple stoves to maintain. The cooking fire system required nothing beyond the cooking that families performed regardless. Meals were prepared, floors were warmed, the process was invisible, effortless, integrated so completely into daily life that heating became a byproduct of living rather than a separate struggle. The wives understood this best. Soo Yoon had not changed her cooking routine by a single minute. She prepared the same meals at the same times using the same amount of wood. The only difference was where the heat went, into the floor rather than into the sky. Her labor remained constant while her family's comfort multiplied. The cooking fire that had always been necessary now accomplished what 3 separate fires had struggled to achieve. The original cabin stood for 38 years until Jin's grandson finally replaced the aging structure in 1927 with a modern home equipped with a cast-iron furnace. He kept 1 stone from the original channel, a flat piece of basalt darkened by decades of exhaust passage, smooth from thousands of meals' worth of heat flowing across its surface. That stone sits now in the family home in Portland, displayed on the mantel above a modern gas fireplace. After Sue passed in 1918, her daughter found a note tucked into the family Bible, written in Sue's careful Korean script. They called our kitchen backwards and said the chimney was at the wrong end. They said a cooking fire could not heat a house and that smoke must rise, might not travel. But that cooking fire warmed every floor in our home while their 3 fires struggled to warm their single rooms. Jin built what his grandmother taught him, that fire serves the hand that guides it, that heat goes where the channel takes it, that cooking and warming are one purpose divided only by foolish design. I cooked breakfast and the whole house reached 70 degrees. I cooked dinner and the children slept on warm floors. I changed nothing about my labor. I only captured what others threw away. This was not backwards. This was wisdom too ancient for Americans to recognize and too simple for them to believe. 1 fire, 1 channel, every room warm. The grandmother knew. Now, the grandchildren know. The knowledge travels like the heat, from one generation to the next, warming everyone it touches.